This is Rostra, the St. Theodore Guerin Junior Classical League podcast, where we bring the lessons of classical study into the light for the benefit of all.
Welcome back to another episode of Rostra. We've got Jakob Becker here with us. Jakob is a freshman in Latin 1, and he may have the granddaddy of all topics. If there's anything anybody knows about the ancient world, it seems to be this. If there's anything anybody is interested in the ancient world, it seems to be about this. So, Jakob, what is your topic?
My topic is the Roman Gladiator Games.
Roman Gladiator Games. Man, I tell you what, if there's anything that just gets people pumped, you've even got a rubber duck that looks like a gladiator sitting here beside you as we record for some visual inspiration. So talk to us. First of all, what made you pick that topic?
Well, at least we should have all seen the movie Gladiator. This movie really inspired me because it just showed this was Rome. We have football games. They had the gladiator games. This was the granddaddy of entertainment for the Romans.
Yeah.
And it makes it's really exciting to see past cultures having things like entertainment.
Yeah.
You'd think they just have civilization, but not much more than that.
That's right. This is something that's very similar to the modern world in terms of our sports. You made a perfect comparison there, especially with a very physical sport like football or even, rugby and boxing and all those kinds of sports that really that kind of aggressive sort of thing there. So, all right. So we could ask, since you've got the movie Gladiator, since everybody seems to know so much about gladiators, then maybe we don't even need to do this topic. Hasn't this been done enough? But you were telling me before we started to record that you've got some information, you think that there are some misconceptions out there and you want to use your information to set that straight. So what are some things you think people have wrong about ancient gladiators?
Well, the main thing people think is that the gladiators were just a fight to the death. Oftentimes they were prisoners that were captured, but that's also not always the case. Many times one of the persons just surrendered defeat, and that was it. That's the game. But still, it was still a very deadly sport, so about 1 in 4 people died per event. And because of this, they started losing a lot of their prisoners, and they eventually needed volunteers to come in. And these volunteers are basically the celebrities of their time.
You make a good point, and of course everybody does think about gladiator as, it is blood sport. There's no question. There's going to be some blood.
Oh, yeah.
But they think about it exactly as you said, that people are going to die all the time. Yeah, it was deadly, but that also doesn't make a whole lot of sense. If every single time there's a pair, well, that means half your gladiator pool is dead after every game. Well, pretty quickly you've got no gladiators. So it doesn't make practical sense. So you're exactly right. Now you mentioned volunteers. So what kinds of, and you also mentioned prisoners. What sorts of people became gladiators, or where do they get their gladiators from, you might ask? What's the source?
Well, most often it's prisoners, and then the gladiators just a feed of a punishment for prisoners. But like I said, they started to run out after people died.
Yeah.
So they got volunteers in to fight. They often got paid really well, and they became really popular.
So yeah, a couple things. Yeah, you're right. You got these prisoners of war, so that was very, very common. And yeah, you did have people who were volunteering, if you will. Basically, they were selling themselves into slavery is what it was. And some of this was because you had people who were so poor and who really couldn't find food and job and ways to take care of themselves. Well, hey, as a gladiator, at least I'm going to get fed. Right? As a gladiator, at least I'm going to get cared for, and these people were cared for and groomed very much like professional athletes, as you mentioned earlier. So, yeah, there were people who saw that, hey, this is more attractive than the life that I'm living now. Yeah.
Like you said, there's a lot of people in debt that were coming into the gladiator games to get paid well or to have a better sort of life, even if they had to fight every couple months.
Now, you mentioned celebrity gladiators. Obviously, we have celebrity athletes today. I mean, good grief, we're all walking around with jerseys and stuff with our favorite athletes' names on them. What do you mean about celebrity gladiators?
Well, the gladiators, when they people really like to see them win. because winning equals great, like
Sure.
greatness or glory.
Sure.
So these gladiators, after they keep winning, oftentimes they've earned their freedom, or like if they retire, like the volunteer ones, if they
Yeah.
retire, they become very famous because like the people really like them for their glory of winning the game.
Sure, and just like us, people knew those gladiators, right? They knew certain names of gladiators, or they knew certain styles of gladiator that they particularly followed, and that sort of thing. Some of these guys, I don't know if you ran across this, some of these guys, after they maybe earned their freedom, they hired out as bodyguards, and they hired out as guards of people's private homes, because obviously they had the fighting skills. So yeah. So what did you find out about any kinds of styles of fighting or weaponry or anything like that?
Well, there's a bunch of different types of gladiator fights. They range mostly based off your size and skill. You know, the lower ranked gladiators, they're just mostly like hand-to-hand combat. Prisoners, they would use wild beasts to go just as an extermination because they're not going to win. But as you move up the ranks, like you begin to get armor, weapons, swords, stuff like that to show like your progress or like your glory. Like,
Yeah.
because you start off with a wooden sword for training. So like many
Sure.
of like the early level gladiators use those wooden swords.
Right.
But the wooden sword also has another thing that it means though.
Yes.
If you like win enough, and if you were like a slave, you could win your freedom, and
Yes.
that wooden sword symbolized your freedom.
Exactly, because you can't fight for real with a wooden sword, and so yeah, that's a symbol that you don't have to fight anymore. Very good. Glad that you discovered that. So kind of back to this idea of celebrity gladiators. Again, we were talking a little bit before we sat down to record, and you mentioned a couple of gladiators where there was something kind of special that happened between them. Something about the length of their fight or something like that. That was an interesting story. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, one thing that people think in the gladiators, there's always a winner. This is not always the case. It's usually the case, but in certain cases, gladiator games end in a draw. Like this pretty famous case of these two fighters, Priscus and Versus. They both fought for over 3 hours of like nonstop bloodshed. And after both of them standing on top, they both, like, the crowd went wild, and eventually they gained their freedom from holding off for so long.
And I don't know if you've ever watched professional boxing or even just saying like a professional or collegiate level football or basketball game. 3 hours
Yeah, it's
of
a
two
lot.
guys going at it. I mean, can you imagine how exhausted and wounded these guys would have been, and still there's no clear winner, which is extraordinary. Something else is interesting, and I'd be interested to know if you ran across this. There's something odd about the fact that you've got these prisoners and slaves, and yet you're training them how to kill and giving them weapons. And it seems like, well, surely some of these gladiators might have had a revolt or rebelled against that. Did you run across, by any chance, a particular gladiator who led a revolt against his Roman masters? You did not. Then that's okay. We will be talking about it later this year in your class, but there was a famous gladiator named Spartacus who, at the end of the day, is basically, hey, this is nuts. I got all these weapons here, and I'm fighting for these people's amusement? That's crazy. And so he actually led a revolt of gladiators, and they broke out and started to kind of run around the countryside and try to get free there. I always ask this question of guests on the show. You've done a lot of research. You've looked into a lot of stuff here. Is there anything that's just burning particular you want to make sure that an audience listening to this podcast would take away? Something you want to make sure that they know? Anything in particular you've got?
The gladiator games were not the main punishment. The training was. The training was barbaric. Think about like World War II concentration camps, kind of barbaric.
Yeah.
It was brutal.
And I got to say, I'm glad you brought that point of comparison in. It's easy for us, I think, in the modern age to almost treat the idea of gladiators as something like comic book characters, right? These are really cool guys, and look at that really cool armor, and that guy's got a big net and a trident, and that dude's over there's got a full helmet and spear and blah, blah. It's easy to get caught up in that and forget the fact these are real people who are being, for the most part, forced, so against their will, made to fight in a way that could lead to death for other people's entertainment. And as civilized as we like to think of ancient Rome, and in many aspects ancient Rome was civilized, that is barbaric. And I'm glad you used that word. I think that's an appropriate thing to get across there. So, yeah.
Yep. One thing that is thankful, the gladiator games did eventually stop in 325 when Constantine made Christianity the official religion, and then they ended. However, illegal games still continued on for hundreds of years.
Sure.
Even if it wasn't in the Colosseum, people were still dying.
Sure. And again, you've got that kind of thing today. You got, there's certain animal fights today that are illegal, but people still host them anyhow, and
Those
they
are horrible.
gamble and bet on them, and the animals get terribly hurt. And so obviously that's what that is. But certainly, that ended with Constantine. Jacob, thank you so much for being a guest on the show. We're glad to have you, and you gave us some good information about gladiators.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Rostra. You may check out all our episodes on Spotify and follow us on social media at GarinJCL. That's at GuerinJCL.